they understood where it came from, and they were able to say, we understand what you meant by that, and kind of stand by the statement. So I think as a public, we should all take a second and say, maybe I'm interpreting this different, and maybe the intent was pure, and I can be okay with that, at least okay with it. You don't have to make this thing yourself or make it a rallying cry or anything, but just be okay with the fact that somebody else saw fit to say it that way and show their support in that way.
Caleb, you kind of hinted at this in the middle of your answer to that last question, but how did you feel yesterday when you saw not only the verdict, but the reaction from various corners afterward?
It's funny because I, just to tie it into the quote, I understood kind of what that was saying. I can breathe, and this is just from a personal standpoint. I know the what I can't breathe meant and what the literal translation of that. But for this whole trial, and since last year, really, since the arrest of Chauvin in this whole case, you've been holding your breath because as someone who's looked into the history of the relationship between law enforcement and the Black community and the way these things go, I was bracing myself for a Watts riot or, things like that we've had when the verdict wasn't favorable. And when, I just remember thinking, Trayvon Martin's case with George Zimmerman was just such a cut and dry, to me, in my opinion, obvious. This kid was murdered, right? And there should be some sort of justice. And I remember the shock of not getting that justice. So for a long time, for this whole trial, I've been holding my breath in essence to see, like, okay, is this going to be the same old thing? But I think in that spirit, and that from my own personal interpretation, I can understand. I can breathe now. Because justice, in my opinion, I think there was justice from the verdict, and I think you're starting to see accountability, which is I think the answer to all of this, accountability on all sides for how things go. So I was relieved to see that the outcome of the trial was one that got some sense of justice for the family and for the community who experienced this, and B, kind of set the standards for accountability going forward. And as painful as it is to say, and as much as I don't want to say it, avoided the catastrophe or the chaos or the riotous actions that may have ensued had the verdict not gone the way it did. So it was kind of a sigh of relief, getting that verdict back the way it came.
Caleb Herring joining us here on Cofield and Company. Caleb, we had roughly a few hours between the build-up to the Floyd verdict and then another police shooting of a 16-year-old girl in Columbus. And so you referenced the fact that there was some relief of the avoidance of something being worse. Does the verdict in the George Floyd trial give you any sense of, okay, this is something where we might be able to start to go the other direction and be able to move toward more justice? Or do you see something like what happened in Columbus and feel like, wow, we got like a few hours of relief here?
Well, I think it's the two. First, I would say the two incidents are very different, and from my perspective, being involved in law enforcement, obviously, and then I think just looking at the two situations and what we know so far about them, very different circumstances, right? So that's the first thing I'd say. But the second thing I would say is that both point out flaws in both policing and in society that I think need to be worked at, whether it's in-home violence or violence against fellow citizens or the way we react to resolving our own personal conflict in our lives, and then also the way that law enforcement interacts with the community they police, in essence, and the community that they serve. And I think it should be a more fitting term. But I think it does sting a little bit to, get that verdict and then just hours later see, another situation where law enforcement encounter goes bad. And I won't say, that the officer was 100% wrong because I don't know all the facts. I won't say that for that Columbus shooting. I won't say that I know all the details, but anytime a police interaction, no matter how wrong or right the victim was, no matter how wrong or right the officer was, anytime that interaction ends with a death, either of the officer or the civilian, you could say it was a bad interaction, and we got to work to make those better. I think the verdict gives hope to people that at least accountability is achievable. And I think the next step that both sides, both law enforcement and civilian population have to take is how do we avoid having to hold someone accountable for their actions? How do we get to a place where the amount of people that die, whether justified or unjustified at the hands of law enforcement, is dwindling closer to zero? And we get to a community and society where police aren't required to show that kind of deadly force or make that decision. Then I think that we can work towards it. And I think that verdict does give me the hope that that's attainable, or at least the accountability aspect of it is attainable.
Caleb Herring up on Cofield and Company. Caleb's in law enforcement as well, so he brings that perspective. You just heard a little bit of that. Did you guys talk about this at work? Was there anyone who was mad? I wonder what what the thought is of across law enforcement. Again, not a monolith, so not everyone's going to agree.
Right, and I think that's the thing a lot of people forget about law enforcement. There's a wide spectrum of people and opinions and political and otherwise that are opinionated and within the profession, because we're humans too. But I do think that the overarching majority of law enforcement personnel that I've spoken with have no issue with calling a bad cop or the actions of a cop that were bad or hateful or shameful to the profession even when they see it. And I think the overarching majority of people were in agreement that this was not good policing, to say the least, right? So I wouldn't say that there was a joyous, celebratory victory lap that was taken. But I would say that, everybody understands when you put on the badge, you're putting on more than just a shiny piece of metal, right? You're putting on what that badge represents, and you have an oath that you stand by, that you swear in with, and you have a duty to uphold it in all circumstances, and a duty to care and value life. And I think that is in the eyes of good officers, and I tend to try to surround myself with those, right? That was the understanding. And officers make mistakes. Officers have patterns of behavior, and we would be the first to call it out, right? And the good ones should. So I don't think anybody was upset necessarily at the verdict, but we'll see how the law enforcement community reacts as a whole. But I don't think anybody with a reasonable mindset in law enforcement would have an issue with the verdict that came out on Monday.
Caleb Herring is with us. Let's get a couple of football questions in here. Not so important, but Caleb was with us, and this is his expertise along with law enforcement. We got this weird story today. Nick Sirianni talking about asking or playing rock, paper, scissors with draft prospects. Maybe I don't get it. I don't know. I don't know what goes into the process. I guess you're trying to reinvent the wheel, coming up with different ways to see, what sort of competitive fire guys have. You ever heard anything like this? And what would be your reaction if you were an NFL draft prospect and the coach is like, all right, rock, paper, scissors time?
Yeah, I'd probably laugh at him, honestly. I mean, not with all due respect, laugh at him, because I'm trying to get that job, right? But I mean, there's other ways to evaluate football talent and a guy's competitive drive than rock, paper, scissors in a serious way. And I just don't think that comes off as, serious, evaluation. If that even is a serious thing, it could have been a joke. I don't know, but it comes off as just a little bit ridiculous, off the wall, and like you said, trying to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to do things like that. You're trying to be different. You're trying to stand out and, make a name for yourself, I guess, as a new head coach, and, make an impact. And going as far as say that the competition's open. I don't think that it should be open. But those kind of things are just, I guess, the way you go about handling the media in your first year as a head coach. You try to kind of establish something different and something new. I don't think rock, paper, scissors is the move, though. I don't think you should be saying that you're using rock, paper, scissors, a child's game, like a child's game that we've all played to evaluate a quarterback's ability or a player's ability or where they should fall on a draft board. It's kind of off the wall there.
Let's talk about one of the guys who's projected top 20, maybe top 10. The Heisman winner, Devonta Smith, measured officially at 6 foot, half an inch, 166 pounds. Is that just too small to warrant a top 10 selection?
It's dangerous. It's risky. The explosive plays, the explosion, the speed, the athleticism that he brings you at from his position is, I can understand why you would want to, or why the wow factor is there for him as far as getting that top 15, top 20 spot. But when you draft that high, you're not only drafting for now. You're typically drafting for longevity, for the future, somebody to kind of build around or to at least be a consistent piece that you're working with. And I just don't know if it's proven. And I mean, this has been a story for Smith his whole career, right? He's always been a small guy. And people probably said the same thing when he signed up to play at Alabama. But look what he did there, won the Heisman, right? And that was a part of his Heisman speech was kind of proving the doubters wrong. So I'm not going to put it against him. But for a team, a business, really, is how we should phrase this. And I guess a team, you would seem like, yeah, get the best player that's available. But for the business aspect of football, I don't know if it's worth the investment of a top 20 pick. And that's nothing against his talent or his ability. It's just, have we seen somebody at that size survive the NFL for a full 17 now game season and be, you know, as impactful for the entirety of that year, taking hits by guys a lot bigger than him and a lot stronger than him over and over, and being really able to contribute as much as a top 15, top 20 pick should. That's the aspect that I'm worried about. I think his talent-wise, he deserves that. He deserves that respect for what he did at Alabama. But the longevity of a guy, a $166 in the NFL, is just something that I have a question about.
NFL turned down a bunch of rule proposals today. One thing they did agree to is they're going to open things up when it comes to numbers on different players and the positions. They got something goofy. It's probably not going to change a whole lot this year because you got to buy out the inventory of your jersey if you're changing jersey numbers, which is nuts. Is this important to the players? Like, do players really care? Like, when you were going to school, did you care what number you wore? Like, would you like to have been like number 99 at quarterback?
I mean, that would have been great, right? 99 quarterbacks stand out for sure. But,
sure,
you know, there is some significance to having numbers. And I think, you know, for me, the number that I would have loved to have was number 5. It was like paying homage to my dad who played quarterback. And that was the number I had all throughout my, you know, Pop Warner high school career. And unfortunately, I couldn't have it at UNLV, but I just made number 8 my own, right? So it would have meant something to me to keep number 5. And I know a lot of players have maybe more significant reasons for having a number, maybe some pledge to a child or something like that they want to uphold, or maybe just like the number. It could be the reasons vary of why guys like to have different numbers, but overall, I don't think it's the biggest deal as far as what the league will look like. You may have, like you said, the jersey sales might be the biggest, the most impacted area of this, because now somebody's going to have, you know, a throwback jersey, or, you know, remember when he was number 19. And you see that a lot when guys change teams, and they have a new number with the new team, and the old jersey somehow becomes like kind of a throwback if you have that when you're a real fan, whatever, what have you. But, yeah, I don't think that's going to be – there's other rule changes and things that I think they've added too that I think will have bigger impacts. And I think the replay official one is one that kind of stands out to me, with them being able to have input on the field decisions based on what they see from the broadcast booth, which when it comes to challenging plays, head coaches have always had the guy in the headset on the team, where the coordinator who's upstairs kind of saying, hey, yeah, you should throw the flag on that because of what we're seeing upstairs. And now I guess having an official with that perspective to just tell the referees down on the field that, hey, you got that spot wrong, or hey, that is an incomplete pass. We don't need them to throw the challenge flag and waste all of our time. Just we'll get the decision right from the get-go. So